I'll present in English, and I will also show some slides as the background for my presentation. So first of all, thank you for all the comments, all the information that was shared before. It makes my work right now easier and more difficult at the same time. Whatever was said about by Katya about the award, the recognition, Righteous Among the Nation, is helping. Whatever was said by Marek Siwiec about the political background is making my work a little bit more complex. So I will try to address also some issues already mentioned. First of all, I titled my presentation, What Makes the Righteous Among the Nations? In the context of Polish cases, Poland, and I would like to focus on two things. One, what makes people to act, not to be indifferent, to help, to do something positive. But I'm even more interested in the second stage of what makes the righteous is the recognition, how they are recognized and what's needed. And as Marek Siwiec mentioned, in Poland, we have an ongoing discussion. Unfortunately, we cannot say it in the past, that it happened in the past. It's still going on, the discussion. And there are two titles used in Poland. One is Righteous Among the Nations, and the other is the abbreviation. It's just the righteous. So the righteous among the nations are those people who are recognized by Yad Vashem, fulfilling all the conditions that Katya already presented. But there is an aspiration, an attempt to prove that there were more people who were not recognized by Yad Vashem. And so far, if they are not recognized, there are Polish activists and politicians who call them righteous. So when you read anything about Poland and this issue, be aware of these two titles, because it's very confusing for someone who is not aware of that. So we were talking about the numbers in the context of Righteous Among the Nations. And I think one of the issues that should be mentioned when we talked about the Righteous Among the Nations is the background of any action that was taken during the Holocaust and the action that was recognized after the Holocaust. And in the context of Poland, we have to talk about the area that is much wider, much bigger than Poland today, that was much complex than Poland today. It was multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multinational Poland before the Second World War. And here you have the map showing Poland before the Second World War, inhabited by over 34 million people. 10%, approximately 3.5 million, were the Jews. So 10% of the population was Jewish. So when we enter the story of the Second World War, we have to think also about these proportions. 10% of the population being Jewish and the 90% non-Jewish, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all the others were Polish Catholics. There were also other minorities. There was Muslim community in Poland. There was Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Church as well. There were other nationalities. So besides Jews, there were other groups of victims during the Second World War. And what is important in the context of the Holocaust in Poland is the fact that Poland was occupied throughout the Second World War. It was occupied by two countries at the beginning of the Second World War, Germany and Soviet Union. And starting in 1941, when Germany attacked Soviet Union, the whole Poland was occupied by the German forces as well. I mean, the remaining parts. So that means the entire territory of Poland was the playground for the plan that the Germans had against the Jews. And occupied Poland became the center or epicenter of the Holocaust, with the ghettos, with work, concentration camps, but most important, the death camps, the whole system of the death camps. So Polish Jews were in a very close proximity of the death centers. And all these actions that were aimed, that were targeting the Jews. On top of that, there was also the law that was exposed, that was imposed on Poles during the German Nazi occupation. It was the law that was basically threatening anyone who would help the Jews, or who would even make an attempt to help the Jews who were outside of the ghetto or outside of the camp. So basically, the death sentence was the punishment. And it was not just to those who were helping, but entire families could be affected by that. And this is the condition which is also quite important in the context of talking about the righteous among the nations. So we have several elements that make the background of helping Jews, being kind of only a bystander and not acting. We see many possible scenarios that were followed during the Second World War. And sometimes the history is presented like people either helped or betrayed, or helped or didn't act. But in fact, the Second World War is full of this gray zone of people who made an attempt to help, but they were scared, or people who helped once, but then betrayed the Jews. So we have a lot of complex stories. And now we have to remember about the outcome of the Holocaust in Poland. 90% of Polish Jews were killed during the Second World War. So 90% of this approximately 3.5 million Jews who lived in Poland before the Second World War were killed. Those who survived, many of them, over 50% of those who survived in Soviet Union, because they escaped to East, because they escaped from the territory that was targeted by the German army. So we see that the whole attempt to help the Jews, to save them, was not as successful as one could imagine. Nevertheless, when we look at the list provided by Yad Vashem, and here you have the link and the fragment of the list of those people who helped the Jews in Poland and who were recognized by Yad Vashem is impressive. 7,112 people recognized, as Katja said at the beginning of, this is the data from the beginning of 2020. 119 pages in this PDF file, the list of those who were recognized, in some cases, the entire families. And we are here not talking about the competition. You know, when we look at the numbers, we cannot compare them easily, because sometimes there's one person recognized by Yad Vashem, but in fact, the whole process of helping Jews was much more complex, and the whole family was involved, or the group of friends, or some neighbors. In some cases, it was individual act, but we never have the full picture. So it's hard to give the pattern. Like, there are some attempts among historians to say that to save one Jew, you need 10 people. So it's not mathematics. It's not so simple. Each case is different. Each case is unique. And here again, we have the numbers for the countries. So the total number recognized by Yad Vashem, again, the data from the beginning of 2020, is over 27,000. So if you look at Poland, number for Poland, 7,000, it's impressive. And this is a very high percentage of what was already done as the recognition process. But then again, you have to think about the numbers before the war. Poland had the biggest Jewish population in Europe. And if you put the numbers of those who were saved, those who helped, and you put it together with the Jews who lived in Poland, then the data is maybe not that impressive. We are also talking about the country that had approximately 34 million people. So if you put this 7,000 in the context of the entire population, then of course it's a different scale. So think about it. I'm usually, as a historian, I'm trying to provide data. I'm trying to provide these facts and make people thinking and analyze it and put it in the context. But being historian, I'm also sensitive to individual stories. So I would like to tell a few stories or mention few righteous among the nations from Poland. And I will start with the story of Honorata Mucha, who was, I can say, someone I knew quite well. I met her years ago after working with the family saved by her and her husband. And it was amazing story of friendship and almost family connection between her and the Jews she saved. Everything, the whole saving process happened in the farm, not far from the town of Jagiellonian. And I use her story, some of you can read if you're interested in the details, her story and the story of three Friedman brothers, religious Jews she saved in the barn, as the average story. This is the story of bravery and the story of risk. She was doing it out of sympathy, compassion, like something that was almost natural to her. And she and her family were recognized only in the year 2005. It was quite late when we look at the chronology of the recognition. And this recognition happened as the result of the return. The family she saved returned to Poland. One of the members of the family made a movie, Hiding and Seeking, very dramatic, very also moving documentary that portrayed not just the saving process, not just the recognition, but also they asked the question about the reversed roles. What would happen if the Friedman brothers were in the position of the rescuers? Would they do the same? So this was the situation that in many cases we cannot imagine today because the rescuers and the rescued Jews are no longer alive. But they asked this question in case of Mucha. I would like to mention the case of Irena Sendler. I think one of the most famous today, righteous among the nations in Poland. But I will not tell the obvious things the things that are quite well known, that she was involved in the process of saving over 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto, that she worked together with other Poles, especially Polish women, on that. But I would like to focus on one thing, that after the Second World War, for many decades, she was a forgotten one. She was forgotten for the act of bravery she did. And it's not a complete truth. I have to add that she was recognized by Yad Vashem quite early in the 60s. But in Poland, she was not known as the hero. She was only made popular. Her act was made popular much, much later. And what is even more surprising is the fact that she was made popular. Her story was made known um, um, by the students from United States. So the question is, why so late and why not recognized locally? And the answer might be in her political activities, in her political views after the Second World War. Um, and again, we are touching the issue of politics, and I do not want to get into it because we have limited time. The other person that I would like to mention as the example of complexity is Zofia Kossak-Sztucka, who was, it's a fascinating story, but it's also a very complex black and white story with grays involved. She was quite well-known political and literary activist before the Second World War, known for her anti-Semitic views. He was one of the most visible leaders of the national right-wing organizations. And during the Second World War, during the Holocaust, she started acting in the most surprising way. She was involved in the first initiative to help the Jews, to save the Jews. She published the brochure, the letter protest, where she was saying, basically, I will simplify it a little bit, but she was saying, forget about the political past, forget about political issues, but we now have to be concerned about human beings. So we might hate the Jews, but they are human beings and we have to help them. That's our Christian duty. And of course, this is not the person that can be presented as a superhero, because there is also this dark past, and she never was, fully separated from this past. And she was recognized as the righteous among the nations. But based on the documentation I've seen, it was only after the second attempt, because there was always this question how we can recognize the person who was openly and constantly anti-Semitic. So we see that the deeds, the actions, sometimes have this complexity and are separated from political views. And just two more cases, because I'm running out of time. So I would just present two cases that are quite recent ones in Poland, and they show another aspect of complexity. Is the story of Ulma's family, the Ulmas from Markowa, the town of Markowa. The story that is very, I have to say, I have to admit, very moving and very complex. The whole family, Józef and Victoria with their children, they were saving for quite a long time 8 Jews in their household. And as they were denounced to the Germans, the whole family and the Jews they saved was killed. The woman was pregnant, so the number of victims of both sides, the family of rescuers and those who were rescued, all of them were killed. And here we have the absolute story of bravery. I mean, they were heroes. But if we talk about the story of the righteous here, we also have to ask the questions about who betrayed them, who denounced them. Without this part of the story, it's not complete. And the person who denounced them was someone who was Polish, who was living in the region, who worked most likely as a navy blue policeman, Policja Granatowa. So here we have the complexity of being the righteous among the nations. And if we want to teach about the righteous among the nations, if we want to pass the message, we always have to talk also about the other side. because to see the full complexity of the righteous among the nations, we have to see that people made other choice, that there were people who were denouncing Jews, who were betraying their neighbors, who were saving Jews. So the Polish cases of those who saved the Jews, I can take a risk and say that many of them, if not majority of them, were always combined with someone who was making attempt to betray. And many of the righteous among the nations, they are saying that they were afraid on the same level, with the same strength of their neighbors, as they were afraid of any German patrol coming to the village or coming to the town. And the last case of, I cannot say Polish righteous among the nations yet, but the last case of helping Jews is the case of the case from Switzerland, where a Polish envoy residing in Bern made kind of a project, a group. He had a group of people who were involved in providing passports to Polish Jews, mostly Polish Jews, who were at risk of losing their life, of being deported, of being killed. And this case is, I believe, the ongoing case of recognizing not only Alexander Ładoś, but also other people who were involved in the process. So it also shows that even today, so many years after the Holocaust, we still find the documents, we still find the cases that haven't been recognized. And it's the ongoing story of not only finding the righteous among the nations, but also the story of those who were saved and their children and grandchildren who have no idea that there was a righteous person who helped their parents, grandparents to survive. So it's the constant process of discovering the story. And just to conclude, I would like to mention the process that Marek Siwiec was referring to, mentioning the stories of Jedwabne, and other complex issues. I think the discussion about the complexity of the righteous among the nations, but also other attitudes, started many years ago, and it still continues. There was a very iconic and important text published in the 80s, Poor Poles Look at the Ghetto, referring to Poles as the victims, looking at the Jews as the victims. How did they behave? And this discussion is still, I would say, the ongoing one. And just last slide, and another reference to what Marek Siwiec was mentioning, the absence of the word sprawiedliwy or the righteous in the internet. I will fill the gap and tell you about the website about Polish righteous among the nations, Polish righteous as well, because there are stories that were not recognized. And you can find the details in Polish, in English, and some data that might be interesting for you doing research or just trying to compare issues, compare the situation in Poland and Ukraine. Thank you for your attention, and I will finish with this slide.
Do you have some government structure or government department which working with righteous among the nations?
To my best knowledge, there is no governmental institution that is working with the righteous among the nations, but there are governmental institutions or government-sponsored institutions that are doing some research on the righteous among the nations or on the cases of saving Jews, rescuing Jews. I can mention the project or refer to the project that was mentioned by Marek Siwiec, organized by the Institute, Polish Institute of National Remembrance, IPN or IPN, that has a special group of scholars working on the issue of those who saved the Jews, but also on those who perished, who were killed because of saving the Jews. Then again, there is another state-sponsored institute, Pilecki Institute or Institute Pileckiego, that is running the project about the burn group. So they are dealing with the research and I would say promotion, but not dealing with the righteous among the nations themselves.
Thank you so much. And also we have questions from Katya and from Marek. Who first?
I think Katya was first.
Katya, no,
Thank
Katya
you.
is lady.
I will start. First of all, Edyta, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful presentation. And I would like to support what you actually said, which is we always, as you know, as I mentioned, and as you already know, the basis for the recognition of righteous among the nations is almost always the testimony of a survivor. And when we see the testimony, the full testimony of a survivor, there is always, the story is not only about good people. It always includes a lot of information about murder, about persecution, about, you know, bad neighbors, like to put it simply, about people who were thought by a Jewish family as those that could be relied on, and they betrayed the Jews at the last moment. And then sometimes the rescue, the help comes absolutely from, you know, unexpected source, unexpected place, from unexpected people. So this is indeed, every story is very complicated. I should only add that, of course, when people write to Yad Vashem, when Jewish survivors write to Yad Vashem, they, of course, they want somehow, you know, to make the story probably more beautiful, not to include inside the complexity of the situation, of staying in hiding, of like during 2 years at someone's family. They try not, you know, not to, you know, to make the angles like, you know, more slim, because you cannot actually imagine that people staying inside the house, hiding in the bunker or somewhere under the floor, and those who are living among them and traveling every day about with fear that something might happen, you cannot really imagine that they don't have some, you know, fights and quarrels, and they, it's not, we are not angels, and they were not angels as well. But, you know, when someone writes about his righteous, he something wants to make him recognized, he tries, you know, to put those small things aside. We can only know about them only when we have another testimony, a bigger one, not purposed for the Righteous Among the Nations program, but, you know, like a whole story, a diary, a memoir, you know, even the Spielberg testimony. It makes, it sheds more light. And then we have a more complex, we understand how a situation was much more complex than just like, I came to this house, they received me gladly and hid me for 2.5 years. It was not like that. So from the historical point of view, you, of course, you have to get a more wider picture. And another thing that I would like to relate, there was something that you mentioned about why so late, why we are remembering these things so late. Well, as with Poland, but even more with the Soviet Union, there was actually danger, not even in you know, in recognizing someone from the Soviet Union as righteous among the nations in Israel. There was danger of damaging this person. If the regime was different. There was no, the Israel was seen like an imperialistic and anti-socialist government, and nobody, like the medal and the certificate of righteous from Israel was the last thing needed for someone living in Ukraine. Really, in the 60s and the 70s, it was something that could ruin someone's career or the career of his or her children forever. So this is why I have many examples. I have many times saw it in the testimonies and heard from people that the rescuers asked their survivors to stop writing to them from the States or from Israel, because it was no good for them. It put them in an awkward position. So let's be glad it started late, but at least it started, and we started working about it. Actually, the work about the Soviet Union and everything that happened there started at the beginning of the 90s with the big aliyah, with the big wave of Jews who repatriated to Israel from the Soviet Union. Late, but better than never.
Yes, I will. Thank you for this comment, and I fully agree that better late than never. And I would just add two small matters. One is the case of Poland and recognizing the righteous. Of course, I mentioned Irena Sendler that she was recognized quite early, together with the Rada Pomocy Żydom and other people involved, the Council to Aid the Jews in Poland. But of course, their recognition in Israel was not popularized in Poland for the reasons you mentioned. But on the other hand, there were people who were trying to sort of diminish what she did for the reason that she was politically, not welcome. So it's one thing, the communist period, which suppressed all these cases of bravery and heroism, and the narrative about the Holocaust was completely different than we have it right now. So the real changes only started in 1989 after the collapse of communism. But the changes didn't happen immediately. 10 years later, at the beginning of the 21st century, we still had in Poland cases in Eastern Poland when people refused to be recognized as righteous among the nations publicly, because they were afraid. They were still afraid that such recognition, and we are talking about the 21st century, that this will ruin their everyday life, that the neighbors would be jealous, or the neighbors would be unhappy, or the neighbors would suspect them of making money, or any other imagined or real fears. So this is really a complex story, not just about what happened during the war, not just what happened after the war, what is happening now. And just last comment, and we'll allow another question. I mentioned the Mucha family in my presentation. And this is an amazing story that, the family remembered what happened during the war. But because of the neighbors and some attacks and some jealousy and some suspicions after the war, this family, this Polish Catholic family, was trying to cut the communication with the Jews they saved, who left to America and who didn't forget their saviors. They were sending checks, $10, $50 checks to help them. But every time the check came to the village, of course, everybody knew about it, because the postman, mentioned here and there is check coming from America to the family. So this is something that made the recognition of the righteous among the nations even more complex. So there is a lot of forced denial and a lot of forgetting, just to make it easier and simpler.
Marek, у вас тоже комментарий.
Very short amendment to this what Dr. Gawron said, we have in Poland the Center for Holocaust Research in Polish Academy of Science, and I think it is one of the most prestigious places where people on the highest scientific position, they are making research and they are publishing. For your information, I am speaking about my Ukrainian friends. In the last issue of the periodic paper, there is an amazing article about the Bandera and his responsibility for the crime of Owen and UPA. So if you want to extend your knowledge about some Ukrainian issues, I'm ready to share this this knowledge. It is in Polish, but available anytime. So next time when I will be in Kiev, I will bring this book with me. Thanks.
Okay, so I would just add, we are adding to each other. I would add that this periodical, Zagłada Żydów, which in fact is one of the best periodicals, not only in Poland, but in the world about the Holocaust, it was made available fully online. So if you're interested, it was recently, just within the recent weeks, made fully available online. So it's open access, and you can, exactly, thank you for showing the cover so people can write down the title. This periodical is available online, not just in Polish. There are some volumes that were translated to English, so it will make your reading a little bit more accessible if you don't speak Polish.